A wave of $5,500 payouts is being distributed to anyone who received VA, SSI, SSDI, or Social Security in just 48 hours. Prepare to celebrate, as this has the potential to significantly impact your life. However, before you jump too quickly, you may be wondering if you qualify. Fear not. We're here to explain everything to you, regardless of how long you've been getting benefits or how new to the procedure you are. Everyone who meets the requirements should be aware of this possibility, but what's the catch? And how can you ensure that you receive that extra money? We have all the information you need, but don't forget that time is of the essence. Our helpful professionals are here to walk you through the procedure step by step, from determining your eligibility to ensuring that your information is current. 2 days remain till the payments begin. Going out, you don't want to pass up this opportunity. Don't delay another second, because this could completely change the course of your finances. For millions of Americans, just making ends meet has become incredibly tough due to the enormous inflation over the last few years, which has affected everything from groceries to the cost of everything from gas to utilities, has increased dramatically, yet wages and fixed incomes have not kept up. Growing costs have made things particularly difficult for elderly and people getting government benefits like Social Security, SSI, SSDI, and VA payments. These beneficiaries are on relatively little. Because of fixed incomes that don't rise in tandem with costs, people's buying power has significantly decreased as costs continue to rise. In response to the pressure that high inflation has placed on American households, especially the most vulnerable, such as the elderly and the disabled, the federal government has proposed a special one-time payment to lessen the burden that, if authorized, could result in millions of Americans receiving up to $5,500 in cash in their bank accounts over the course of the next few months. Let's discuss who would be qualified for these payments and how they would operate. Now let's get going. Under the proposed plan, Social Security beneficiaries who are currently receiving regular retirement benefits would receive a maximum payment of $5,500 if they meet the income requirements. The full $5,500 payment would be made to individual Social Security recipients whose total income is less than $75,000 based on their most recent tax return. Income threshold for the full $5,500 per person is $150,000. Above those income levels, the payment amount starts to phase out Social Security recipients making over $95,000 as individuals or $190,000 as a joint. Tax return for married couples receiving Social Security where at least one spouse is receiving benefits. This income-based strategy tries to target the inflation relief payments toward low and middle-income seniors who need them the most, rather than richer recipients. Filers would not receive any payment at all. If this idea is implemented, an estimated 50 million retired Americans would get some kind of direct payment. With the majority getting the entire $5,500, the sum could significantly impact seniors who are having trouble paying. Increasing food, utility, health care, and other expenses on fixed Social Security incomes would entitle recipients of Supplementary Security Income, or SSI, to an additional $5,500. Payments under this plan are intended for low-income seniors and the disabled, regardless of any other income they may have. Therefore, by automatically including all SSI recipients for the full payment, the most vulnerable and lowest-income Americans, roughly 8 million people, would receive the inflation relief. Presently get benefits from SSI, if adopted, nearly every member of that group would receive $5,500 in payments. Additionally, the plan would pay $5,500 to individuals who are receiving Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. People with impairments who are eligible for SSDI compensation do so because of their, regardless of total income from other sources. SSDI beneficiaries with a prior work history, such as SSI recipients, would automatically receive the full $5,500. Approximately 9 million American workers currently rely on SSDI, with many of them living on these disability benefits and managing rising living expenses. An additional $5,500, combined with the other significant federal recipient categories, may be quite helpful. Many people receiving benefits from the Department of Veterans Affairs would also be eligible for $5,500 payments under the proposal. Disabled veterans receiving VA disability compensation would be eligible for the full $5,500 payment under the scheme for low-income veterans to get benefits from the VA pension. If this proposal receives final approval, about 5 million disabled veterans and low-income veterans could get the payments to help offset the effects of inflation. If you're one of the people who might be eligible for these inflation relief payments based on the specifics thus far, rather than receiving a single $5,500 lump sum, which some people may find difficult to budget and spend wisely, you might be wondering how exactly you would receive the money. The suggested plan calls for splitting the payments into 2 installments, the first of which would be for roughly $2,700, which would be released a few months after the legislation was completed and funded. The second payment, for roughly the remaining $2,800, would be paid roughly 6 months following the first payment. This split payment plan gives you several cash infusions throughout time. Instead of paying everything at once, splitting the payments helps prevent possible problems with money being spent too quickly or improperly managed. Additionally, even though the payments are not subject to federal taxes, they might be considered taxable income depending on the amount of your other sources of income. The proposal's main question is where exactly the $5,500 in payments would come from. The draft parliamentary legislation states that the payments would be funded, but spreading them over 2 tax years lessens the potential impact on taxable income in any given year. By using a portion of the previous year's Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA contributed about $370 billion to the reduction of the deficit through increased business taxes and IRS tax enforcement. The plan suggests taking about $300 billion out of that pot of money designated for deficit reduction in order to pay for the expenses associated with the dollar. While taking from deficit reduction may sound concerning, this plan argues that getting billions into the hands of struggling Americans quickly can provide an economic boost that helps reduce inflation itself. 5,500 payments for Social Security, SSI, SSDI, VA beneficiaries, and associated administrative costs. In essence, it's a massive economic stimulus plan that reroutes deficit reduction funds into consumer spending that added spending and support for the broader economy. Hundreds of billions of dollars in direct payments to over 80 million Americans would immediately increase consumer spending and demand while also supporting the broader economy through that spending. Demand might reduce inflation by spurring economic development. So, when might these suggested payments begin to materialize and what else needs to happen? As of right now, the proposal is merely a draft law that has been submitted to the House and Senate. Therefore, it still needs to go through the entire legislative process, which includes being discussed, revised, voted on, and then signed into law by the President. Given the current party divide in Washington, there will undoubtedly be heated discussions over this idea and its wisdom. To divert funds intended for deficit reduction toward consumer payments, which may be viewed as excessive government spending. Nevertheless, proponents argue that the need for action is justified by the large number of Americans who are still struggling with high inflation. In the best-case scenario, if the legislation passes Congress swiftly over the coming few, while the proposed $5,500 payments would be a welcome relief, any bumps or delays in the legislative process could easily extend a final decision and disbursement date into the fall or end of this year. Americans may start seeing the first wave of $2,700 payments by this summer. There are skeptics of the idea and possible drawbacks for millions of Americans who are struggling financially. Even if covered by reallocated money for deficit reduction, the sheer cost of sending out over 80 million payments, totaling hundreds of billions of dollars, is a significant source of worry. Expenditure plan during a period when public debt levels are already at all-time highs. The payment plan's detractors claim that it is an expensive Band-Aid approach that ignores the core causes of inflation, such as excessive money printing, problems with the supply chain, and labor shortages. They maintain that pumping increased financial inflows could potentially make inflation worse if they cause consumer demand to soar and surpass. Concerns about possible fraud, abuse, or theft involving the payments are also present throughout the supply chain. If the payments are not allocated and overseen appropriately from an equitable perspective, some contend the retirement benefits to retirees with significant assets and income streams may be dispersed due to excessively high income thresholds, not limited to Social Security income. On the other hand, some believe that the income restrictions are too low, excluding a large number of middle-class households that are already under a great deal of stress due to rising costs.